A common concern for every Airbnb host is that after a guest stay, they're going to come back to find that something has been damaged or worse, destroyed, or there was a party and they can't host their next guest because there was so much damage to the property. This does happen, and unfortunately for us, it did happen very recently. At one of our luxury cabins on Easter weekend, our cleaners arrived after the guest checked out to find quite the disaster, a lot of damage, and it caused us to have to scramble to get a claim into Airbnb and to make sure that we could get our owner reimbursed for all the damages that the guests caused. My name is L'Oreal Keaton. This is Secrets to Short-Term Rental Success, and today I'm going to be bringing you 10 tips on how to successfully file a claim with Airbnb so that you can get reimbursed if a guest damages your property. Welcome back, everybody. So yes, unfortunately, over this past Easter weekend, we did have guests that appeared to throw some type of combination of, I don't know, an Easter egg hunt and a party, but we walked into quite a disaster at this luxury cabin. There was graffiti on the porches. There was broken furniture, quite a lot of it, broken vases, a complete disaster inside the house. And we immediately knew that we were going to need professional cleaning, painting, a lot of furniture replacement. And so it was a bit of a nightmare, and it doesn't happen very often, but when it does, there is definitely an art to filing a claim with Airbnb. These were Airbnb guests, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And we needed to jump right into action, take care of it, and make sure that we could protect our owner so that she could be reimbursed for all of the furniture we were going to have to replace, as well as the extra expenses that were going to be incurred for cleaning up literally graffiti on her porch, as well as just a complete mess inside. So with that, I want to talk to you about the 10 things that you can do when it comes to filing a claim with Airbnb to make sure that it is successful for yourself or your owners if there is damage to your property from an Airbnb guest. Tip number 1, the first thing that you want to do, and this can be hard for some people, is you need to stay calm. You need to stay professional. You need to not fire off angry messages through the Airbnb app or by a text message or calling the guest when you walk into a property or your cleaners message you and show you a bunch of damage. Everybody gets it. It is really hard to fathom sometimes that you can present a beautiful home to your guests and really care about their experience and give them a clean, beautiful property and then have them literally walk out of it and leave a disaster for you to clean up, to replace furniture, damages, all that kind of stuff. It is a little bit hard to take. It's hard to understand, but you have to stay professional. It will do you no favors to go ahead and start firing off angry messages. So tip number 1 is to stay calm. Additionally, I usually start to gather information before I say anything to the guest, but sometimes it's so obvious that I will send a message and say, hey, it looks like we might have some damage. Do you know what happened? And I try not to make it accusatory in any way. You just kind of want to let them know that, hey, we found some stuff and we're wondering if you could help us figure out like what happened. And sometimes guests will be helpful if you approach them in a calm way and they'll say something like, oh my gosh, yes, this happened, or more often, no, I have no idea. But if you come at them in an angry way, or you say you wrecked my house and all kinds of, not nice words, it's not going to go well. So be polite, be professional. You can ask them what happened and say, hey, we might need to file a claim with our insurance company. We need a little more information about what happened. Can you help us? Keep it polite and professional. They may give you some valuable information. If you can't do that, say nothing, and we'll move on to tip number 2. Okay, tip number 2, super important. It is an absolute must do for any Airbnb claim, and that is you need to take timestamp photos immediately of all damages. And that is super important. If your cleaners don't have this, there are free apps in the App Store that will timestamp your photos, but you need to take pictures in this app that will date it and time when these photos were taken. Super important. It is really necessary for evidence for Airbnb. It is easy to do, but it's necessary. So once again, a lot of times emotions are high. There's a lot of damage. You may have a back-to-back where you're trying to figure out, can you host your next guest? But make sure that anybody on your team has that app and takes timestamp photos of absolutely everything that was broken, damaged, requires additional cleaning, anything like that. Have all of that timestamped so that you can save it and put it into your Airbnb claim. Okay, tip number 3 is timing. Timing is really important when it comes to filing a claim with Airbnb. It used to be that if you had a back-to-back, you had to file your claim before the next guest checked in, which can be pretty cumbersome if you've got a cleaning team that is trying to flip a house that may already be damaged and collect evidence and be able to file a claim. They've since kind of relaxed with that a little bit, but I still prefer, especially if there is a back-to-back, meaning that you've got guests checking in on the same day that the guests that damaged your property are checking out. You need to be ready to start a claim on Airbnb before the next guest gets there. And if you don't have to worry about that because there's no guests arriving the next day, it needs to be in within 72 hours. And Airbnb sometimes gives a little latitude if you've already started something on how long it takes to be completed. But we like to have all of ours done within 72 hours. And on the day we find the damage, I typically go into the app, you go under the details section of your guest, and it will say something about filing a reimbursement request. And you click on that, and it will walk you through the process of what you need to do. And this is specifically for getting reimbursed for damages to your house. So you can go ahead and open it, fill in just a couple of things and save it. And then Airbnb knows that you're going to be filing a request. That's enough on day one, but you really want to aim to have this entire thing done within 72 hours. But absolutely make sure that you have started the request for reimbursement and also that all the timestamp photos are done before your next guests arrive. That can be challenging, but you don't want to linger here and risk that Airbnb says you can't prove it was the guests that actually did the damage because you delayed in sending them pictures or didn't do the right timestamps, or that you didn't file a request until after you already had another check-in. Okay, tip number 4 about filing a request or a reimbursement request from Airbnb if there's damages to your property. In addition to getting all the time-stamped photos, you need to immediately assess if you have to call in additional help. For example, do you need to hire professional cleaners? Do you need a carpet cleaning service to come in? Do you need a different handyman to come in or a plumber to come in or a drywall person if they put a hole in your wall? Anything like that, you need to go ahead and get into the mode of getting people out there to at least get you quotes in writing immediately. And this is one of the things that's really important about building a team wherever you have a rental property is make sure you've got people on call that can do that. You're going to want to have evidence of anything you had to pay out that is excessive than what your normal cleaning fee is, or say, any kind of maintenance or things like that. So make sure that you mobilize people that can get out there right away. They don't have to necessarily do the work right away, especially if you're fortunate enough not to have an incoming guest, but make sure that they can give you quotes on letterhead as to what it's going to cost to repair any damages that there are. Additionally, you also want to look at having receipts or similar pictures and prices of furniture or whatever was damaged in your home. This is always a good idea to file anyway. So when you're setting up a property and you are putting in new furniture and things like that, save the receipts if you can. Save some images in a file of what it cost you to purchase them, because what Airbnb is also going to ask you for is what is the cost of the items that were damaged? What did you pay for them? And then they're also going to ask you what is the replacement cost, because depending on what the item is, it may cost more to replace it than it did when you bought it. So make sure that you have all of that ready, all of your quotes or invoices. And if somebody has to do something for you right away, like that day, your cleaner, say, for example, charges you double the time, make sure they write you an invoice because you want to get everything in again within that 72 hours. So make sure that you are filing all of this documentation. It's going to go a long way to making sure that your claim is successful. Tip number 5, this step is filing the request. So after you've gathered all of the information that we've talked about, you've got your quotes, you've got your, everything that it was going to cost you to replace things, you've got all the evidence, timestamp photos, everything's there. It's time to actually file the request with Airbnb. Again, pay attention to the timing. Once you open a request, even if you only do like a couple lines and then you just save it, they're going to send you an email telling you when you need to have this finished by. And again, you want to do it kind of the sooner the better. Once you file the request, the guest will be notified. So this is important. Make sure that when you write it, so there is a couple steps of the request. There's going to be documentation that they're going to ask you to upload, pictures, all of that kind of stuff. They're going to ask you like for the date you think it happened, all that kind of stuff. And then there is a section where you have to describe what happened. I cannot stress this enough. Please be professional and only state the facts. It will, again, do you no good when this is being reviewed by Airbnb if you are, inflammatory in your remarks about the guests or saying things that you don't know are true, just that you're inferring. Just stick to the facts. So, for example, you don't want to say something like the guest threw a wild party and there must have been 50 people there and they caused so much damage. Instead, what you want to say is we arrived at the property to find a significant amount of damage, including a couch with cigarette burn holes in it, some broken chairs, make it specific and make sure that it's just fact-based. Don't make up things that you don't know and don't exaggerate. Keep to the facts, keep it professional because the guest is also going to read this. So there's no reason to make it inflammatory. Just keep it to what happened, what you found, and what needed to be done to repair the damage or to replace any broken furniture, for example. And then you're going to go ahead and file it. What will happen from there is that Airbnb is going to let you know with an email that they received the request. Step number 6, after you file the claim, you're going to wait for the guest response. The first thing that Airbnb is going to do, and you're going to see that when it goes to file it, is it's actually asking the guest to pay the damages. Now, sometimes this is pretty significant. I have filed claims for thousands of dollars, and I knew pretty well that the guests were not going to pay it. In fact, I had to stay where guests had paid a really short amount. They were there for a couple nights. They did not pay a lot of money, and their damage request was like 4 times the amount of what they paid for the stay. I had a really good feeling at that time that they weren't going to pay it, but it is the first step in the process. So be prepared. Step number 6 is that they are going to ask the guest to pay. And be prepared that they are probably not going to do it. In fact, they often don't. I think I've only had one guest say, oh my gosh, yes, and they pay it and they're so sorry, and everything is over right then and there. This is typically also for smaller claims, which I typically don't file anyway, but every once in a while you'll get a guest where it was something minor but significant enough that you need to replace it, particularly if you're a property manager. If it's something like a chair that I've got to replace, I will file a request because it's enough money that I don't want the owners to have to pay for it. So it does happen, but just be prepared. Tip number 6, ask the guest first to pay the claim. Be prepared that they are probably not going to do it. And if they don't, the next step will be that Airbnb will step in and they are going to review the claim and then make a decision as to whether or not they're going to pay you, and if so, how much. That brings me to tip number 7. And tip number 7 is actually a repeat of tip number 1, but at this stage in the process, I feel like it's really important to mention again, and that is to stay calm and be professional. Remember what I told you with number 6, where the first thing that's going to happen is they are going to ask the guest to pay the damage claim? 9 times out of 10, you are going to get an angry guest that is going to message you, text you, call you, and tell you how you are essentially full of it and that they didn't do anything to your house and they're not going to pay it. And I have seen guests get very, very angry. What I can tell you is so important is do not engage them. Just don't do it. If you need to speak to them, I keep it in Messenger on Airbnb. If it's in a text, make sure you save them, screenshot them, because you may need them as evidence to show Airbnb if something like that is happening, particularly if a guest gets threatening or anything like that. Make sure that it's all documented. But I tend to stick to the messaging app because Airbnb is reviewing it, and just be prepared. And guests are going to say all kinds of crazy things. I have heard every story under the sun about how it couldn't possibly have been them and everything was like that before they arrived, all kinds of stuff. So just don't engage and keep it professional. And keep in mind that when you're trying to get this claim to be paid to you, this reimbursement request, that Airbnb is going to review all of your communications. So you want to stay on the up and up. Don't go low. Don't go to where a guest might go if they start being inappropriate and saying mean things or cursing at you or things like that. Don't go there. Don't engage them. And what I've said a couple of times is, I've taken this to Airbnb to help resolve this matter. Best wishes to you. And I literally leave it at that. They often still keep firing messages and I just ignore them at that point. So just make sure that it's been documented in Messenger that you're requesting Airbnb's help and that that's where you're leaving it, and then don't engage the guest anymore. So tip number 8 is, how do you handle the process when the guest doesn't pay? And I guess I should say that there are some guests that do. It is few and far between, but if a guest agrees to pay when you file this reimbursement request, great, you're done. If they say yes, it's literally, Airbnb makes it as simple for them as clicking a button. Yes, I'm going to pay. No, I'm not going to pay. If they say yes, you're going to get a payout, usually within a couple of business days, similar to how you do when a guest stays at your property, and then the matter's done. I do know that some of you are probably wondering about the reviews and how does this all fit into when you have to do a damage request. I am getting to that, I promise. But the next part of number 8 is, okay, so what happens if they don't pay? You're going to get an email from Airbnb, usually within, I think pretty much immediately, they'll tell you that the guest refused to pay. They'll send something saying, don't worry, we're going to review this. So now it's gone to Airbnb. Typically, I believe the reps for the reimbursement requests or the damage claims must work in specific areas, or they're assigned to certain hosts, because at least for us, even though we haven't filed too many damage claims, we do have the same representative from Airbnb that emails us. So it seems like there is some consistency there, which is nice. So you want to make sure that you are super helpful to that Airbnb representative and that you give them just the facts. Again, make sure you don't exaggerate things and tell them what happened. And I usually find that they are quite helpful. Mostly they're going to communicate with you by email. They may call you for additional details, but if you have done everything by the book, your evidence is great. Again, you've got timestamp photos, you've got documentation of everything you've had to pay out, everything you've had to replace, all of that stuff. I found that the process is pretty simple and Airbnb will pay the claim out relatively quickly, and that rep is going to let you know that. So that's what you can hope for, is that you've done your job well, everything is well documented, and they are going to pay the claim for you. But that doesn't always happen. And so we're going to get into that with tip number 9. Tip number 9. Be prepared that Airbnb may not pay your entire claim, and it's going to be up to you to decide how you're going to handle that. I do want you to be realistic in your expectations. So one of the things that Airbnb asks you in your reimbursement request is, how old are the pieces that were damaged? So they want to know, are they new? I think they give you like a bullet pointed menu of, is it less than a year? Is it more? And like the age of items. And that's because they are going to take depreciation off of items that were damaged. And the first time this happened to me, I was a little like, what the heck? But I do understand it. And I think you have to be realistic. It is unfortunate, of course, that very likely it is going to cost you more to replace an item, even if it's 2 or 3 years old, than it did when you paid for it new. But Airbnb is going to take depreciation with the understanding, which does make sense, that, if, say, in our case, we had a bunch of broken Adirondack chairs. Now, they're the resin kind that are really expensive and are supposed to have a lifetime warranty. But when they asked me how old they were, they were like 3 to 5 years old. So it didn't take a ton of a depreciation, but they did take some. So we didn't get the full reimbursement for the replacement cost. But at the end of the day, you kind of have to pick your battles. I understood that. On items that were less than a year, they gave me full replacement costs. So I think that that's just something that they're looking at. They will give you an explanation of everything. It doesn't mean that what they say is set in stone. If you question what they're going to pay you, if they're not paying you the full amount, again, be professional, stay calm, and you can engage with your rep and ask why, and see if you can, bring more evidence forward or ask why they're not paying your entire claim, and kind of go back and forth with them that way. But again, keep it professional and calm. There is no reason to be rude to anybody, and you just want to work through it in a productive way. But be professional and just set your expectations, because you can't expect to get $1,000 for grandma's couch. Like, it just may not happen, and you want to be realistic in what you're asking for and in what you expect Airbnb to pay. A damage claim is not for you to cash in and make money. It is to replace and cover anything extra that you had to pay out and anything that was damaged. So just keep that in mind, be realistic in your expectations, and be honest in your claims, and don't put anything that's not true in there. Okay, so tip number 10, let's talk about reviews for guests that have damaged your property. Now, a short time ago, before Airbnb had their policy in place about taking down retaliatory reviews when hosts have to ask for a damage request, hosts were really, I think, careful, myself included, about asking a guest for money when they damaged your property, because there was no rules in place from Airbnb, who, let's be honest, really a lot of times, even still to this day, really tend to favor the guest. And if you asked a guest to pay for something that they damaged in your property, they could leave you a nasty review as retaliation, and Airbnb wouldn't do anything about it. So many a host would often just kind of take one on the chin, pay for the broken chair themselves, and not risk getting a bad review from an angry guest because you asked them for money. So that happened for a long time. Airbnb does have a new policy in place. It's been in place now for a while. I am growing to trust it a little bit more, but in all honesty, it is still a little nerve-wracking for me to realize that when I ask a guest for money and they could potentially leave like a 1-star review just because they're mad, that Airbnb is in fact going to take it down. But it has been true so far. A lot of hosts have had a lot of success with this. I think that Airbnb has recognized that there was a hole in the system where they were allowing guests to really, be unfair to hosts that ask them for things that they deserve because the guest caused damage to their property. So when it comes to reviews, when you have a reimbursement request pending with a guest, this is a tricky one still. Again, even for me, there are some great videos out there on ways that you can ask a guest to review you before you file the damage claim. I've actually used that with one that I knew was going to be a doozy of a damage claim, but I had a really good rapport with the guest. It actually really surprised me that they had left so much damage. And I unknowingly said, thank you so much for staying. We'll hope you'll leave us a review. And our cleaner actually didn't get to the property until right before the review request was going out, which is usually in the afternoon for Airbnb. She did then at that point start sending all the pictures and was like, this place is a mess and we're going to have to file a claim. But it was right at the review time and the guests reviewed us like right away, which was good. I knew it was going to be a good review because they had said so many great things and loved the house. So I reviewed them. I didn't make it a mean one. I reviewed them just so that it couldn't be edited and it was already on file. And then I hit them with quite a significant damage claim, but it was necessary. And in that one, they didn't pay, Airbnb did. But the review process was kind of like done because they couldn't edit their review and I couldn't edit mine and we were finished. But now you have this kind of just wonder of whether or not the guest is going to review you when you send a damage request to them. And if they do, is Airbnb going to take it down? Their policy is yes, they're going to take it down, but it does have to be retaliatory. And so again, this is where you want to make sure that you have documented every single thing. It is really important in your messages that you check on your guests and ask them if they're enjoying their stay. I have actually used that in a guest that filed a damage claim to us, which was kind of crazy. And it was a complete scam, but she had made some mistakes in her messaging and had said repeatedly over a number of nights about how amazing the house was and everything was super clean and they loved it. And then it was at the very end that all of a sudden, I don't know if somebody talked to her about scamming, she tried to say things with the house were not what they were. And it was all of the messages about how amazing everything was and us checking in on them that saved that review and had Airbnb take it down because it was clear that it was retaliatory because we would not give them the refund that they were asking for over something that was untrue. So again, that's a little bit of a long-winded story, but just to say, I have had the retaliatory review process work for me with Airbnb. You do have to call them. And I also like to say it to my rep when we're handling the damage request. If Airbnb is working with us on it, I like to put in an email, hey, I'm concerned that this guest might leave a retaliatory review. Can you assure me of the process? What do I need to do if they leave something that is unfair because I've asked for a damage request? So now that that process is in place, I feel a lot better about it and it has worked. So don't worry too much about a guest leaving you a bad review. But again, you do want to pick your battles. And I suggest that you file damage claims for significant damage. You also don't want to be one of those hosts on Airbnb that is filing like a request every other stay for like a wine glass. Like that's just silly. It's not going to paint you in the best light as a host with Airbnb if they're seeing that all the time you're filing damage requests for little things. So stick to doing it for when it really matters and it's a significant charge that you're going to have to pay if the guests don't do it. And then what do you do about the review? So I have to say that this is a little bit controversial. It's a little bit hard to decide. And I think each host has to make their own decision. I typically do not leave a bad review for guests unless it was so outrageous that I really want other hosts to be aware that these guests shouldn't be on the platform. And typically I'll have that discussion with our rep. It's only happened to me a couple of times where I've mentioned to the representative that's helping us with the case that I'm not so sure that these guests should be on the platform. And they have kind of helped with that. So a review wasn't really necessary. I have one time left a very significant bad review for a guest that was flat out scamming us. And even Airbnb admitted to that, but I wasn't sure if they were going to kick her off the platform or not. And if she was still going to be a guest, I wanted other hosts to know about it. But typically I try to move on from these things, get the reimbursement request in for my owner or for us, for our personal properties, and not like add salt into the wound, so to speak, by leaving a bad review. That said, I think you do have a responsibility as a host that if you have really significant damages from guests that they really shouldn't be on the Airbnb platform because they are a risk to other hosts, then you should leave a review. But again, as you're in this process, I like to mention that to Airbnb and have them kind of handle it because they definitely have done that before where it wasn't necessary for me to leave a bad review. So again, sometimes it's just not worth it. I don't think you need to go down that road and on top of everything else, like put a scathing review out there for a guest at your property. It's not really my style. And again, I think there's other ways to solve it. And you just kind of want to get a bead from Airbnb on where they are. And also like what happened. It's not worth giving somebody a bad review because they broke some of your furniture. I mean, yes, they should have paid it and they should be upfront about it. And there's all kinds of what ifs. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's worth just like slamming somebody unless they've done, again, really significant stuff. But if they have, Airbnb is usually going to handle that. So I hope this helps. Again, it can be very nerve-wracking when you list your home and you have strangers staying in it and you put so much love and effort into your Airbnb and you have somebody that damages your property. But I hope this video was helpful in letting you know the steps that happen with filing a claim, some tips to make it more successful for you, and good luck to everybody out there. Thanks for watching Secrets to Short-Term Rental Success, and happy hosting.